and welcome to Language Ladder. In this video, we're going to talk about the poem An Elementary School Classroom in a Slum. But before we do that, I've got something to show you. Watch this clip and take a note of the people and places you see in it. So, what did you notice about these pictures? Could you guess where these pictures are from? Well, these pictures show children living in slum, their living conditions, and their school. So the poem that we are going to read next is about one such school. It discusses what the schools in slum look like, what are the living conditions of children in slum, and what people in authority can do to help them improve their life. So let's begin with our analysis of the poem An Elementary School Classroom in a Slum.
Take a look at the title first. So the title here introduces the setting of the poem, that is the place where the poem is set. So it tells us that the poem is about a school which is situated in a slum. It also hints at the theme of the poem. So from the title, we can guess that the theme is possibly about poverty, education, and childhood. Now let's read the first stanza of the poem. Far, far from gusty waves, these children's faces, like rootless weeds, the hair torn round their pallor, the tall girl with her weighed down head, the paper-seeming boy with rat's eyes, the stunted, unlucky heir of twisted bones, reciting a father's gnarled disease his lesson from his desk. At back of the dim class, one unnoted sweet and young. His eyes live in a dream of squirrel's game, in tree room other than this. So the first few lines describe the faces of the children sitting in that classroom. Now let's look at the highlighted phrase carefully and find out what they tell us about the children's faces. Now what are gusty waves? So the waves that are formed by strong winds are often described as gusty because they are characterized by a certain strength and energy. So the poet says that these children's faces are far, far from gusty waves. They are far from being strong and energetic. They lack that energy or strength which children of this age should have. The phrase also suggests that they look dull and gloomy. Next he says, their faces look like rootless weeds. So we can see the use of simile here as the children are compared with rootless weeds. Now what are weeds? They are unwanted plants, wild plants, which grow on their own and no one really feeds them or looks after them. So the poet compares these children with rootless weeds. They are unwanted. They are not well fed. Nobody really cares for them. Next he uses the word pallor to describe the faces. Now pallor suggests that their faces look pale and unhealthy. So the line, their hair torn round the pallor, indicate that their faces look pale, unhealthy, and their hair is not combed and looks unkempt or untidy. Now in the next part of the stanza, the poet describes specific children sitting in the classroom. He starts with a tall girl with a weighed down head. So possibly she's older than the other children, that is why the adjective tall. But what could be possibly weighing her down? Is it the burden of poverty? Perhaps she feels burdened or is exhausted by the responsibility, struggles, and challenges that she has to endure or face because she is poor. It could also mean that she is ill or maybe tired. Next, the poet describes another boy sitting in the classroom. Look at the phrases carefully. Paper seeming boy with rat's eyes. So, paper seeming suggests that he's very thin and most probably malnourished. He's so thin and weak that he has been compared with a paper. Now, rat's eyes perhaps indicate that he's hungry and his eyes are searching for food, just like a rat does. Rat's eye can also indicate fear or restlessness. Perhaps because of hunger, he is unable to concentrate and his eyes are eagerly searching for food, just like a rat does. The poet further describes another child as stunted, unlucky heir of twisted bones who is reciting his lesson from the desk, unable to stand because of the deformity in his legs. Stunted means something that is not growing or developing properly. So this boy hasn't been growing or developing as per his age. Now the word heir means someone who legally inherits the wealth or property from another person, very often from the older member of the family. However, here this boy has only inherited disease from his father, because of which his bones are twisted or distorted. So far, the poet presents a somber or sad picture of this classroom in a slum where the children are hungry, malnourished, dull, and stricken by diseases. Now, in the next few lines, the poet draws our attention to this small boy sitting at the back of this dim classroom. It says, "His at back of the dim class, one unnoted sweet and young. His eyes live in a dream of squirrel's game, in tree room other than this." So he looks younger than the rest of the children and remains unnoticed in the classroom. Unlike other children, this particular boy seems to have dream or hope in his eyes. Squirrel's game could possibly refer to squirrels running around the trees, climbing up and down the trees, going in and out of tree holes. So the boy perhaps dreams of certain freedom from this dark, small room in which the children are at the moment. So he dreams of freedom from this dark room or the present predicament. Now let's read the second stanza. On sour cream walls, donations. Shakespeare's head, cloudless at dawn. Civilized dome, riding all cities. Belt flowery Tyrolese valley. Open-handed map, awarding the world its world. And yet, for these children, these windows, not this map, their world. Where all their futures painted with a fog. A narrow street sealed in with a lead sky. Far, far from rivers, capes, and stars of words. So, in the second stanza, the poet describes the classroom. He begins with what is most obvious, that is, the walls. The phrase sour cream suggests that the walls look pale, dull yellow, and perhaps haven't been painted recently. It also indicates the decaying condition of the classroom. The word donations here could possibly refer to the things that have been given to the school in charity, and they have been put on the walls. Next, the poet points out a number of things that are there on the walls of this classroom. He begins with Shakespeare's head. Now, what do you think that implies here? It could possibly refer to a portrait of Shakespeare, and Shakespeare's head here also becomes the symbol of wisdom and knowledge. Next, there is a picture of a cloudless dawn, which suggests a clear blue sky, a bright sky. Civilized dome or institutions suggest the so-called progress of the world. That progress hasn't really made a difference in the lives of these children. It hasn't made their living conditions any better. Next, he describes a picture depicting the picturesque Tyrolese Valley with flowers. Now, it's a reference to the beautiful green valleys in Austria. And belled here possibly refers to the sound of the bells tied around the sheep's neck grazing in the valley. And then there is a map of the world. Now, open-handed map is a reference to how powerful people influence the world. These maps are drawn at their will, and awarding world its world perhaps suggests how conquerors, invaders, and dictators divide the world. Now, all these things, Shakespeare's head, cloudless dawn, civilized dome, Tyrolese Valley, they all stand in a stark contrast to this classroom. They are not a part of these children's life. So the poet next questions the relevance of all these things in that dingy classroom. He says, for these children, this map holds no relevance. Look at this line. Children, these windows, not this map, their world. So for them, it's what they see from this window of the classroom that is their world. It's the slum with all its misery, poverty, hunger that forms their world. Look at the next line carefully. He says, where all their future is painted with a fog. Now, fog is very often associated with lack of clarity. So this perhaps indicates that their future is unclear, it's foggy, it's bleak and not bright. So he says the slum is their world where their future is uncertain and bleak. Let's read the last two lines of this stanza once again. A narrow street sealed in with a lead sky, far, far from rivers, capes, and stars of words. So lead sky, what does it mean? It means dull grey sky. So he says their fate is sealed in these narrow streets of the slum. Lead sky perhaps refers to this dull grey sky as opposed to the cloudless dawn in the picture. And in the last line, by using the repetition of the word far, far, he once again emphasizes that their world or reality is far away from the beautiful rivers, capes, and all the knowledge, when he says stars of words, that Shakespeare represents. It is filled with poverty, gloom, diseases, hunger, and lack of hope and opportunities. Now let's read the third stanza. Surely Shakespeare is wicked, the map a bad example, with ships and sun and love tempting them to steal, for lives that slyly turn in their cramped holes, from fog to endless night. On their slag heap these children wear skins peeped through by bones, and spectacles of steel with mended glass, like bottle bits on stones. All of their time and space are foggy slum, so blot their maps with slums as big as doom. So in this stanza, the poet questions the relevance of the kind of education given to these children. Now, Shakespeare is known as a literary genius, and map is an important learning tool. But the poet here dismisses both of them. He calls Shakespeare wicked and map a bad example. Why do you think he calls them so? Well, the answer lies in the next line. With ships and sun and love tempting them to steal. So ships here perhaps symbolizes travel or adventure. Sun symbolizes hope or enlightenment. So the stories of travel, hope and love by Shakespeare and the beautiful world shown by map tempts these children to steal. Them here refers to these children sitting in the classroom. They cannot have these things with their limited means. So the temptation leads these children to commit crimes. And he feels that it is not right to paint such pretty pictures of the world in front of these children because they are destined to live in these cramped holes. So here the poet critiques the unrealistic nature of education. Education which is far removed from their reality. It doesn't really help them to make their lives better. On the contrary, it makes them aware of all that they lack. Let's read the third line again. For lives that slyly turn in their cramped holes. So it says these children spend their lives in cramped holes, that is, small and stuffy houses and narrow lanes of the slums. Now, from fog to endless night, on their slag heap these children wear skins peeped through by bones. Now, what does fog to endless night refer to? Perhaps it is a reference to the darkness, hopelessness, uncertain and bleak future that envelopes their lives. Endless night indicates that there is no end to their misery. They are doomed to spend their lives in these dark and dingy slums. Now let's read the next part of the poem. On their slag heap, these children wear skins peeped through by bones and spectacles of steel with mended glass, like bottle bits on stones. Now, what does slag heap mean? It means a pile of waste. So the slums here have been described as a pile of waste. And the poet sees these children amidst pile of waste. And they look so thin and malnourished that one can see their bones peeping through their skin. And spectacles of steels with mended glass, though literally means that their lenses have been repaired, but this line again symbolizes their predicament. Perhaps the poet wants to convey that their poverty shapes the lens through which they view the world, and all they could see is their foggy future from these mended glasses. Now let's look at the last two lines one more time. All of their time and space are foggy slum. So blot their maps with slums as big as doom. So it says that their time, which is their present and future, and their world, which is the slum, is foggy. So again, foggy is a reminder that they have a bleak and uncertain future. And in the last line, so blot their maps with slums as big as doom, the poet once again refers to the maps of the rich and powerful. Now, these maps have no place for these slums. And the poet here protests against this disparity between the world of rich and the world of the poor. He demands for a fair map, a map which has a place for these children, a map that acknowledges their existence. Now let's look at the last stanza. Unless governor, inspector, visitor, this map becomes their window, and these windows that shut upon their lives like catacombs. Break, oh break open till they break the town, and show the children to green fields, and make their world run azure on gold sands, and let their tongues run naked into books, the white and green leaves open. History theirs whose language is the sun. So the final stanza begins with an appeal. The poet appeals people in authority, such as governors, inspectors, to take action in order to improve the living conditions of these children. Now let's see what he asks them to do in the next line. this map becomes their window. So he suggests that the beautiful world that is shown in the map of their classroom, that beautiful world needs to become their window or their reality. He wants to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor. He wants the poor people to have an access to this beautiful world. And then he says these windows that shut upon their lives as catacombs. Now, what are catacombs? They are underground passages and rooms where bodies were buried in the past. So he says that this window that confines them to the slum and the dark future, that needs to be broken. And these children need to come out of their slums, the ugly and dirty surroundings. Now let's see what he wants these children to do. And show the children to green fields and make their world run azure on gold sands, and let their tongues run naked into books, the white and green leaves open. So he wants them to see the world that lies beyond the slums, the beautiful green fields. Azure means bright blue sky. So the poet wants them to run under the bright blue sky and on the golden sand. He wants them to break from the shackles of poverty and explore the world. And then he says, and let their tongues run naked into books, the white and green leaves open. Now, what do white and green leaves signify here? Perhaps white leaves is a reference to the books, and green a reference to the nature. So he wants the children to be exposed to both books and nature. Now let's look at the last line closely. History theirs whose language is the sun. So the poet ends his poem with a powerful message. Now what do we associate the sun with? So we usually associate the sun with warmth, light, brightness, knowledge, and power. So he says that those whose language has these qualities, they are capable of creating history. So now let's look at the poetic devices used in the poem. So the first thing that we notice is the use of metaphor. Now what are metaphors? So when we compare two different things which have something in common. So we see the use of metaphor in the first stanza when the poet uses the phrase the paper seeming and rat's eyes to describe one of the boys. Now here these two phrases become metaphor for hunger and malnutrition. In the second stanza, the phrase civilized dome becomes the metaphor for progress. And endless night in the third stanza becomes the metaphor for never-ending misery. And in the last stanza, the phrase the white and green leaves become the metaphor for education and nature. Another poetic device used in this poem is simile. Now what is simile? When we compare two different things and we use the words such as like or as. So you could have guessed the use of simile in the first stanza when the poet says like rootless weeds. So here the children are compared with wild and unwanted plants. Another example of simile in the poem is in the phrase like bottle bits on stones, where the children are compared with the broken bits of bottles. It also depicts their miserable condition, how they are useless as the bits of bottles strewn on the stones. And the last one is like catacombs. So their life in slums is compared with the underground places for burial. So again, the poet paints a very dark and grim picture of the slums. Then the other poetic device that is used in the poem is symbolism. So any action, person, place, or word, or even an object can have a symbolic meaning. That is, literally it means one thing, but in the context, it symbolizes something else. It stands for something or it refers to something. So here, ships can be a symbol of adventure or travel, and sun can be a symbol of hope or enlightenment. Now, let's take a quick look at the poem. So, stanza 1 presents the children living in slums. It shows their plight and predicament. These children look malnourished, weak, unkempt, ill, and exhausted, except that one little boy at the back who still harbors hope in his eyes. Stanza 2 depicts the classroom of an elementary school in a slum. The walls look pale, the room is decaying. The poet points out the pictures adorning the walls of this dark and dingy classroom and how these pictures are in stark contrast to the living conditions of these children. Stanza 3 once again highlights the flaws in the education given to these children. The poet points out how it makes these children aware of the things they lack and tempts them to steal or commit crimes. In this stanza, the poet compares the slum with cramped holes and slag heap where the future is bleak for these children. He also demands for a fair map which acknowledges the existence of slums and these children. And in the final stanza, he starts with an appeal. So the poet wants the gap between the two worlds, the world of the rich and poor, to be reduced. He wants these children to break out of the dirty and ugly surroundings. The stanza also talks about the need for these children to be able to access the beautiful green fields, glorious blue skies, golden sand, and their education should empower them so that even they can make history.
Thanks for watching our video. If you found this useful, then don't forget to like it and do subscribe to our channel to get more updates. In case you have any questions, suggestions, or doubts related to the poem, you can drop them in the comments below.